ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
When Louise Philip was 15 years old, she managed to convince her parents to let her drop out of school and become an actress. She'd just scored her first proper telly job, a regular gig on one of Australia's favourite series in the 1970s, Bellbird. So Louise's life was going just as she had dreamt it would. But then on Boxing Day that year, in a car full of family and friends driving home from Sydney to Melbourne, there was a terrible accident. 2 months into her rehab, Louise was told that she had zero chance of returning to TV, that her career was over before it really began. But just as Louise didn't listen to her parents when they wanted her to finish school, she didn't listen to the TV producers who told her she was now just a charity case. With the support of colleagues, Louise fought her way back and stayed on TV for many years until she did something else that people told her was impossible. She became a mum. Hi, Louise.
Oh, you're making me cry. Oh, dear, yes, that was very special, becoming a mum.
Well, let's start with you as a kid before we get to your own kids. How did you first get into acting as a little girl in Melbourne?
I think I was acting my whole life, actually, because Mum and Dad used to have dinner parties and I would sneak out of my bed, high heels, any kind of costume I could find, and I would apparently entertain all the guests. I'm sure they were terribly entertained as well for as long as they would tolerate me before my mother would say, come on, back to bed, you. But I think I probably started that at about 2. And then I got to school and very first play I was in was Peter Rabbit, Easter play. And I think I was Flopsy or Mopsy, one of those.
One of the classic roles.
Exactly. And I was perfect. I didn't have any lines, but I was a terrific extra. And I just went on every chance I got. I would audition for the school plays and I would do whatever I could.
And what was it about for you, do you think, back then? Was it the attention? Was that the main draw card?
I think it was 2 things. Firstly, I loved fantasy. I was always dressing up. I think I just lived in this very theatrical world myself. I was a big show-off. I loved showing off. You know, one of those kids who loves to cartwheel a lot and, you know, da-da, look at me. So I think there was definitely that kind of attention, but it was also that wellspring inside me that was just bubbling up all the time.
Where do you come in the line of kids in your family?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing I was going to touch on because I do have 5 siblings and I was smack bang in the middle. I was the 4th child.
Far be it from me to make any psychological reflection on that.
It's funny because particularly my 4 sisters, we all like to talk about all those psychological things, how different we are. Was there a lost child? And everybody says, you were never lost, Louise. You were never lost.
You wouldn't let yourself be lost. You'd be cartwheeling past in high heels.
That's it.
What role did your mum play when you were little? How did she help out when you were taking on those roles, say, in community theatre or school plays?
Mum she was there absolutely 100% for me. I would be on stage and I'd be singing or I'd be speaking my lines and I could see Mum in the first or second row and she'd be mouthing the words. She was a very quiet woman. She was reserved in her own space. But I think she just gave all of us kids everything that we needed and she never judged us or held us back. It would have been very easy to try to hold me back, and she never did.
When did you first get the idea that this might be something you could make a go of professionally?
Somebody else got that idea. So I was appearing in HMS Pinafore in my second year of high school. So I was 14 and somebody saw me there he was in the audience and he went up and found my parents after the show and he said, your daughter really has something. You need to do something with her. I've got some contacts. She should be going to St. Martin's Theatre, which was in South Yarra, to learn her craft. And I know somebody at the conservatorium. I'd really like her to apply for a scholarship and see how she goes there because she's got a beautiful singing voice. So he organised all of that. And I ended up at St. Martin's Theatre being really supported by my teacher who said, we need to get you an agent. I'll introduce you to my agent. So off we went and I met Val Mills, who was my agent forever until I retired. And I did start at the conservatorium. I did get a scholarship and I sang under a woman called Miss Kruger, who had very large fingers. That's what I remember about her.
I don't know what noun you were going to use after that.
But she would bang that high B flat, and I would have to repeatedly go with her tappings. But yeah.
So what did your mum was supportive, but what did your dad think at this point about your aspirations for a life as an actress and singer?
Well, he's a fun guy. He's always been a fun guy. He was always the one who played with us every night. He'd get home from work. If it was still light, we'd be out kicking the footy or we'd be throwing a ball or whatever. But I think as I got a little older and he could see that I was starting to get serious about what I wanted to do, I think he started to get scared. And his view was just stay at school. We've got to secure your future, all the rest of it. So he was much more reserved about supporting my desires to be an actress. And I think that was also emphasised by the fact that my grandparents live with us and they definitely disapproved of me. I was not one of those children who would just sit there and speak when I was spoken to. They found me very precocious. So they were Dad's parents, and I think he sort of had to straddle that line a bit.
So what was happening with you in school by the time you were 14, 15?
Well, I was probably making a nuisance of myself, I think, mostly making a nuisance of myself. And when I said I wanted to leave school, my parents went and spoke to my principal, Mr. Perry. And Mr. Perry said, well, I don't think we can really teach Louise anything here now. I think we need to let her go. He said, but I'll be very interested to see where she is in 10 years' time.
Your dad didn't let that rest, though. That wasn't the end of his efforts to keep you in formal education. Where did he enrol you next?
He enrolled me in a college, a women's college called Bradshaw's Business College for Women, and it was in the city. He enrolled me there, and the first day I went, there was typing and an introduction to shorthand. At the end of the first term, Dad was very shocked to get a phone call from the principal of the college asking when I was intending to start.
What have you been doing?
I would get on the bus at 7:00 in the morning and I'd go into town and I'd just wander around town and then get on the 4:00 bus home. And Mum and Dad would say, oh, how was your day? Oh, good.
Well, did you think you were just never going to get caught doing this, Louise?
I did. But I would sit in the park and eat sandwiches and I'd go to the city square. I did all kinds of things.
Were you getting any TV gigs by this stage?
Not at that stage, but very early after I'd signed with Active Casting Agency, I got a call up to do Division 4 and I was playing a rape victim in Division 4. And then did a Matlock Police and somewhere around the end of October, I was asked to audition for Bellbird.
What was Bellbird and why was it such a big deal in the 1970s?
It was huge, but not so much in the city. It was very big in the country. First of all, for most of Australia, outside of the capital cities, there was only one station, and that was the ABC.
Those were the days. Everyone had to love us then.
Everybody had to love you, for sure. Bellbird was an ABC series. And so the first thing was that my grandparents suddenly loved me because Bellbird was their favourite show, and it came on at 20 to 7 every night of the week. And it went for, I think, 16 years. It ran forever. And it had the cream of the acting crop. It was really special. When I landed the role of Christine Jackson, I can remember my agent saying was, "You have made it because you are in the longest running series in Australia." And that was pretty mind-blowing. It was my third job.
And where was Bellbird filmed?
It was filmed at the ABC studios and at Sunbury when we went, when we went on OB. That's outside broadcasting. We were at Sunbury.
And what was the set like? What do you remember about those early days of being on the
Look, it was very typical of any channel that you might go to. In those days, everything was pretty simple. It was not like the sophistication and the razzle-dazzle that you get now. It was very much a family environment as well. The cast had been working together for so long. It was just one big family. It was very beautiful.
And you embraced this wholeheartedly and, were living what would have felt like the dream at 15, caught this big break, everything going your way. Tell me about Boxing Day that year. What happened?
We were heading back to Melbourne from Sydney because we'd been with my grandparents for Christmas, and I wanted to get back. Even though Bellbird was on a break, I just felt I needed. It had been a big rush. It had been a lot going on in my life, and in that couple of months prior to Christmas, and my sister and brother needed to go back to work, all that sort of thing. So we were travelling back. Dad was driving. There was Christine, my sister's friend from Queensland. There was my brother, Malcolm, and my sister, Pam. And we were about 10 miles north of Gundagai. And Christine said, "Hey, Lou, it's my turn in the front seat," because I'd been cheeky and we were supposed to change it, yes, but no.
You didn't point that out.
I didn't want to do that, so I snuck in. And she suddenly woke up to the fact that we hadn't changed. So while Dad was still driving, we swapped over. She went into the front seat. 3 miles south of Gundagai, we had a head-on. Christine was in the front seat. She got a cut on her head and had 10 stitches and was released from hospital. I, on the other hand, was sitting in the middle of the back seat where she would have been. I had a lap sash, but the force of the impact threw me back and forward and back again, and I broke 7 vertebrae and severed my spinal cord.
Were you knocked out?
Originally, yes, but I woke up.
And what do you remember about coming to in the car?
The first thing I remember is opening my eyes and seeing the car radio about 18 inches from my face. And it was just shock, I think. Shock is a fabulous thing.
Were you in pain?
Not at that point, not when I first woke up, no. The pain really came when there was a lot of people around the car when I woke up. So it was some, few minutes after the accident. And somebody called out, "I think we've got a fire in this car." It looked like smoke, or it was actually turned out to be steam. But somebody called out and I immediately panicked. My brother jumped out of the car and I went to get out of the car and the pain in my back was indescribable. And I looked down and my legs didn't move. I went, move, legs, move, because I was in panic. Like I thought there was going to be an explosion. And I went, move, legs, move. And I couldn't move them. And then I realised, I put it all together and I realised that I'd broken my back and that I was paralysed. And I had to hold, it took 45 minutes for the ambulance to get there, and I had to hold myself up on my hands because any weight sitting down was so excruciating. And anyway, when the ambulance arrived, the ambos came and they said, can you give us an idea of your injuries? And I said, oh, look, I think I've broken some ribs and my legs are smashed up because there was a lot of blood. And I said, but I've broken my back. I'm a paraplegic. So I actually told them, and he called out, we've got a spinal case here. And then I passed out in the ambulance. And when I finally really came to, it was a couple of days after the accident. And I didn't know that they'd done an operation on me. And I kind of woke up and the doctor came in and sat beside me and said, I've got some difficult news for you, but there's nothing I can do about it. You have broken your spine and you're going to be a paraplegic. You'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. And I said, I know. and then he said, because of the internal injuries, he said, it's unlikely that you will have children.
That's so much for a 15-year-old to take in, both of those facts.
It was a lot, but we had the best fun.
What do you mean?
I know that sounds ridiculous, but we had a mad charge sister in ICU, Sister McMillan, her name was, and she was absolutely fantastic. And the orderlies that used to come in and turn me, because I had internal injuries, I was extremely swollen, and they said, "Oh, you're having triplets, Louise, and they're elephants." And they brought in one of the orderlies brought in this hanging thing of 3 baby elephants and hung it on over the top of my bed. But we laughed a lot. And when I left...
Who was the we? Who were you there laughing
I was
with?
there with my sister. So, yeah, she was sitting on the right of me. She had multiple injuries and she had to have operations and things like that. My dad was really badly injured. He was smashed, both his kneecaps, but he broke all the bones in his face and lost an eye, and he needed to have a complete facial reconstruction. Joe, who was in the other car, he was the same. He had virtually identical injuries, but he did lose his partner, Sylvia. She was killed.
Was that part of what gave you the energy, the space to laugh, was the fact that you were that close to losing your life? Was that something you were conscious of?
100%. The first thing is, how lucky are we? How lucky are we? There was a young lad who came in, his name was Drag, and I still remember his name because it was so unusual. But he'd come in, he'd been in a car accident, motorbike, I think, and he died. And he was in the bed next to me, and you can't help but think Sylvia was killed. This chap next to me, Dragon, he's died. Look at us, we're alive, and we don't have brain injuries. We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. So yeah,
your job then was to get as strong as you could, to get as mobile as you could. What sort of patient were you in rehab, Louise?
No, I was a pretty bad patient, typically. The rule thing was very annoying. And I managed to really get on the wrong side of the charge sister. She was very typical of that era. I'm the boss and you do as I say. But I never followed instructions well. She and I didn't get on very well. And one of the things that she wrote in my folder, in my records, was that I was having difficulty adjusting to my disability. And they sent a psychologist to see me. And I refused to see her.
Why didn't you want to see her back then?
Just because it was wrong. It wasn't about not accepting my disability. I accepted it right from the get-go for a number of reasons. The first being that I was the first one to know. Nobody had to tell me anything. Secondly, I was grateful to be alive. Thirdly, I had a father who was driving the car and already deeply in a realm of guilt and pain and suffering. So I didn't want him to feel that he had to be in that space because of my injuries. And finally, I was 15 years old and I had a whole life to live.
What about the sort of randomness of it, which I guess is a factor, of course, for many accidents, but the way that you just 10 minutes before, it swapped seats from the front to the back. So it could have been you walking away with a few stitches.
Exactly. This is my destiny. This is absolutely where I had to be. And I never asked myself why. Never, not once. Said, why me, why me? No. It was meant to be me all the time. And I thank the lucky stars that it was, because if Dad had injured a child that was not his, it would have been far worse. At least this was in the family. It could be dealt with within the family. Yeah.
How was the rest of your family doing with the fact that you were no longer able to walk, especially your mum, who hadn't been in the car that day?
Well, firstly, the first reaction from everybody in the family was, thank God it was you, Lou, because you're the one that would have coped. You're the one that had the personality. This is me. And so everybody felt it was, if it was going to be anybody, thank God it was me.
And that made sense to you as well?
Total sense. But my mum, again, she came every day to the hospital and she cooked my dinner for me and she never missed, not once. My sisters would come in. I was so lucky. I have been absolutely blessed because my family is very close. It's a large, happy family and everybody just pulled together. But my mum, after the accident, she acquired a stutter for some time. And it was really funny because about 5 years after the accident, she and I were talking and she said, I really can feel a cloud lifting from me. And I said to her, I feel exactly the same way. Everything's starting to feel a lot clearer. And that was, I think, the shock, just that realization that the shock was finally wearing off. This was 5 years later. And then eventually she lost the stammer. But yeah, look, a huge upheaval. All her, like half her family in pieces.
How long were you in rehab for before you got your wheelchair, your first wheelchair?
My first wheelchair. So 2 months after the accident, that was the first time I got up into my wheelchair. And that was a grueling exercise because I'd broken so many vertebrae and 4 of my vertebrae were powdered. They were just non-existent. So the operation I'd had in Wagga immediately following the accident was steel rods. And they said, oh, look, we need to make sure that you're strong enough to sit up. So they gave me the task of lifting my chest off a pillow with my arms behind my back And I had to do that for 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
10 minutes. You have no idea how hard that was. But my birthday is the 28th of February. So we'd started a week before, and I said, okay, my goal is I'm going to do this on my birthday. And my birthday came, and we did it. It was unbelievable. The sheets were sopping wet with sweat. It took so much effort.
And when you were sitting then in the wheelchair, how did that feel?
Okay, so the first thing that happened was I pretty much passed out within about 30 seconds because I hadn't been sitting up for 2 months. I'd been lying flat. And they picked me up, put me back into the bed, and I came to. And then about 10 minutes later, they tried it again. And this time I lasted a few more seconds, and then they put me back in the bed and then up again. And the third time I was wobbly. I was very lightheaded, but we got there. But it was a great birthday present.
This is Conversations with Sarah Kanowski. Hear more conversations anytime on the ABC Listen app.
Louise, in those weeks, months in hospital, what were you thinking about TV? What were you imagining might happen with this career that you'd just begun?
Well, until I'd read in the TV Week what Jim Davin had said.
He was a producer of Bellbird.
He was, yes, which was Louise must realise the severe implications of what has happened to her. Her chances of getting back into television are zero. Maybe radio would hold a brighter future for her. The ABC is not a charity setup.
You read that in the TV Week in hospital?
Yes. I was speechless because I really thought I was going to go back into acting. You see, there was so little change in my head. That was the thing. Everybody saw change on the outside, but I didn't necessarily see that change on the outside. There was no change on the inside because I didn't really see that outside change, if you know what I mean.
It makes sense. So you were still you were still that character.
Exactly right.
Why would you not go back?
Yes, exactly.
So when you read this, that reaction, what about your cast, your colleagues from Bellbird? What did they think about it?
So, well, the cast said, if Louise doesn't come back, we're likely to strike. That's what I understand. There were threats of strike action. You've got to remember the cast, very close, tight-knit group, and they didn't want to see one of their own being left behind because of an accident. And to Jim Davin's credit, and God bless him, he changed his mind. And the first thing he did was to ring the doctor, who was the head of the spinal unit at the Austin Hospital. And he said, what do you think if we bring Louise back into the series? And he said, you're setting her up with false expectations.
Your doctor said that?
Mm-hmm. He said, she's much better learning to be a receptionist or doing office work now, but she's not going to be able to cope with a career in television, and you're just giving her false ideas. So Jim Davin then rang my agent, and my agent said, that is ludicrous. She was as tough and as stoic as I know. And she went into bat and she said, that's crazy. I know Louise. I know the kind of person she is. She will come back and she will do well. Anyway, as I say, to Jim's credit, he did do that. Now, that is a very courageous move for him. Even though he had pressure, certainly pressure from the cast, to back down when you're in that very high position, to back down and to say, okay, we'll give her a go. I think that takes enormous courage from him. And so he said, okay, we'll bring you back. So I left rehab in June and I started in the series in July.
What was your first day back on set like?
Coming home, that's what it was like. You're going to make me cry here. Still teary after 52 years, you see. Love never goes away. There were 3 steps to get into the building. The boys came out, lifted me up, went into the rehearsal room, and it was just everybody hugged me and kissed me and welcomed me just with the most beautiful open arms and hearts and minds. What they had to do as well, and so much faith. You know, about a week after the accident, a family friend, one of my dad's closest friends, he was interviewed by the newspaper, and he was asked what he thought about my injuries, and he said, "Louise walks with her mind. She will never stumble." And when I read that, that was the only time I think I cried in hospital. And it was because somebody had so much faith in me. And that was what it was like walking into that rehearsal room. There were people there that had stuck their necks out, that had put their jobs on the line, so to speak, their incomes on the line to bring me back. And I'll be forever grateful for that. And the love in the room was really palpable. It was amazing. And it carried on then for the rest of my time in that series, which was 4 years.
What was the workplace like, Louise, logistically for you now that you had a wheelchair? I mean, now there are lifts and ramps and accessible bathrooms and all that sort of jazz. What were the ABC studios like in the 70s?
Archaic. In a word. It's really funny because I really restarted my career in these incredibly difficult circumstances where there were no accessible toilet facilities. So I had to be very creative about how I managed that. It didn't matter what TV channel I worked for the whole of my career, I always had to be lifted upstairs. I always had to negotiate bad bathrooms or squeamy bathrooms. And I guess I always had to make allowances for how long it would take me to do things.
After your years with Bellbird, you joined another classic Australian series, Cop Shop. What sort of storyline were they offering your character at first?
That of a recluse. So you can't imagine.
No, I was going to say, this doesn't feel your type.
Nothing more opposite you could find for me. But, well, the first thing was that my agent rang and she said, you have a part in Cop Shop. I said, what? Because I didn't even audition for it or anything. So I was just given the role. Oh, yes, you're going to play this character. Read the character and went, oh, my God, this is dreadful. This is horrible.
Why? What was she like?
Because she was shy and wouldn't answer the door when people came to the door.
Because she was in a wheelchair.
Because she was in a wheelchair.
She was a tragic cripple.
Exactly. Totally. And anyway, but nevertheless, it was a job. So somebody has to do it.
You're not the only actor to have said yes to a role.
That's right. And people thought that I was playing the role and they'd think that I was practicing. And I'd have to explain, no, I really am in a wheelchair. And that was quite a revelation for them because in those days the word was cripple. And in those days, I mean, when we had the accident, people openly said, we feel so sorry for your parents. And people honestly thought that I was going to be a burden on them for the rest of their lives. That was the impression that everybody had. So it was very different to today. You didn't see wheelchairs out and about, the very reason being that there was no access. It was so hard to do that.
So could you change your character's way of being at all? Like,
yeah.
Did you push back on that?
Very luckily, there were two things that happened. First of all, it was just a short contract. It was only for 3 months. And Hector Crawford had a housekeeper that worked for him. She'd worked for him for 30 years. And she loved my character. She loved Claire. And she apparently, she asked, is Claire going to stay in the series? He said, no, we're not bringing her back. And she said, well, if you don't bring her back, I'm retiring. I'm leaving you.
The real power behind Australian TV. Right. Hector Crawford's housekeeper.
Absolutely. And so he rang Ian Crawford, who was then the CEO, and they invited me back. The second thing that happened was that I had a meeting with Mari Trevor, who was the producer of Cop Shop. Mari Trevor was the most fabulous human being. She was tiny little thing, a bird, with the biggest, brightest eyes, and just that fabulous energy that is so engaging. You can't help but be mesmerised. And I sat down with her for the meeting to discuss what they would do with me. And I said, hey, hang on a minute. I am a 21-year-old woman. I live alone in my own home. I drive a luxury car. I'm in a national television series. I have a boyfriend. I'm sorry, but what says to you that I have a disability? What says to you that I'm a cripple? The eyes went extra wide and extra bright. They were just a light. And she said, yes, I know. Right, this is what we have to do. We have to go and speak to Gwenda Marsh, who was the head of writing, the writing team. And you've got to tell her that. And then you could work with her on storylines.
So you got to have a fabulous life on screen like you did off screen.
Exactly right. So Claire, over the 4 years that I was with the show, Claire got a boyfriend. She went into business with Valerie, the character of Valerie. They got a cafe and restaurant together and did that. She got married, which was a real tearjerker. And then she fell pregnant and she had her baby naturally. And then she became an advocate for disability rights.
As it was prophesied on Cop Shop, so it came to be in your own life, Louise.
Exactly.
It wasn't just falling in love on the show, it was falling in love in real life. How did you meet Rob?
Well, again, so fortunate that I had the accident, that I was in a wheelchair, that I was on television, and it came to IYDP. Which is the International Year of Disabled Persons. And I was doing Cop Shop. I was in Cop Shop. And Crawfords were being inundated with requests for me to do public speaking.
Because there weren't that many actresses in wheelchairs, I would imagine.
There was nobody. That was just me. So it was very challenging for them because they were getting to the point where they were saying, Louise has to stop this. Louise can't do these things. So they put it in the hands of my agent. My agent rang me and said, now, what you've got to do is prioritise because there's so many requests that you have to prioritise, and you've really got to think, what's in it for me? You've got to tell yourself that, well, what's in it for me, and prioritise. Oh, okay, I can do that. So I got a phone call from a fellow by the name of Bob Yates, who said, we'd like to invite you to be part of the IYDP committee that we're starting. It's called the IYDP Committee for Employment and Industrial Relations. And I said, okay, so what's in it for me? It was so wrong.
Might be like something the Kardashians might say, but just doesn't ring right for you.
No. Anyway, it certainly wasn't. I felt very uncomfortable saying it, but I was told that was supposed to be so stupid. Oh, what an idiot. Anyway, so Rob just got the impression that I was a real pain in the us. He just thought, oh, my God, this woman, she's on another level. She's just one of these terrible stars that are going to be awful to deal with. And anyway, so I agreed to be on the committee. And when I arrived at the first meeting, I was talking to a friend of mine who was also on the committee, Edith Hall, and she was the advisor to Bob Hawke, who was Prime Minister at the time, on disability. I was deeply engaged in conversation with her, and Rob walked past and I looked up and I just could see the back of him, and I thought, turn around. I'd like to see the front of you. And he turned around and it was sparks. Everything went off.
For
like
both of you?
Fireworks, the whole thing. I mean, I was suddenly risen up out of my wheelchair. I was in some kind of ethereal place with light shows and everything else. Oh, there was just he and I. That was it. I was done. I was going to the Logies that night and I had to leave the meeting. So I had my hair and makeup done. I was looking very special. And I kept looking at him during the meeting. I wasn't really concentrating on what everybody else was saying.
Relations
That's right. And there were very important people in the room, I might add. There was the chairman of Safeway and the chairman of Kraft Foods, and they were all very, prestigious people to be in the company of. But all I could do was focus on Rob, and not known to blush. I knew I was in trouble because when I was leaving, I had to leave the meeting early, and I turned the wrong way in the hallway, and he said, oh, sorry, Louise, it's this way. We have to go this way. And I blushed. You
were done for, Louise.
I was dead meat. Anyway, so I flew to Sydney, checked into the hotel. First thing I did was ring my best friend back in Melbourne to say, I've met the man I'm going to marry.
Wow.
And 18 months later, we were married.
That doctor back in the hospital when you were 15 had said to you, you were unable to conceive and have children. How did that play out for you?
Oh, he was so wrong. You see, that's why it's important to just stick to your guns. Yes, he was so wrong. So it took us a little while. We got married and we wanted to have children. But I had said to Rob, I can't have children, and he said that's fine. We'll just not have children. We'll just be us, which was very beautiful. I, on the other hand, I'd resigned myself to that a long time ago. But I said, let's try. Let's give it a go.
No harm trying.
Yeah, that's right. Let's give it a go. So that's what we did. And it took us 12 months, but we fell pregnant. And we were very, very, very excited about that. And the first thing the doctor said to me, my obstetrician said was, well, of course, you'll have a cesarean. Well, what do you think I said to that?
That was probably just a no, thank you.
I'll
do it, damn well, please.
That was a no, thank you.
But was that medically, was he concerned medically, or was it just the presumption that someone in a wheelchair had to be told what to do? What was going on?
Both. So, first of all, my husband is, he's a lot taller than me.
Even without the wheelchair?
And yes, that's right. I mean, I think I probably would have come somewhere at chest level if I had have been standing. But yeah, I think he looked at the difference in us, and I weighed 40 kilos dripping wet, and my husband weighed much more. So I think that was his first concern. But certainly that was how they dealt with things prior to me being in that room. I went to this fellow because a friend of mine had had children with him, and she was in a wheelchair. Anyway, we got to, he realised that he could not have any say over this.
Why was it so important to you to give birth naturally?
I think at the time that was the thing to do. There was a big movement for natural childbirth. So I was definitely influenced by that. But also I thought, why would I have a cesarean? Why wouldn't my body just do as it would normally do? What does my injury have to do with all of that? It's that logical sort of trying to find that logical reason why not, and then understanding that it had to be, well, no reason why not. Let's go for it. And honestly, I was a star in that birthing room. That kid was born. I broke every corpuscle. What is it? My whole neck was just raw red for days. But I pushed that baby out. Good job, Lou. Good job.
I think it's such an empowering thing for a woman to have a baby that way. My experience was you just feel you can do anything after that. Was it like that for you, that real rush of power?
Yeah, well, I think it was vindication. It was relief, actually. Relief and oh, God, I did it. And so, yeah, and we had our first baby. He was 8 months old when I fell pregnant again. So,
holy dooly.
quick time. And we ended up having 3 children under 4, all boys.
What were the logistics of caring for babies, more than one baby at one time, like for you? I mean, that's daunting for any new parent. How was it logistically for you and Rob?
You know, I often say to people, when I had the accident, I was 15, and that was a fantastic time to have it. I had the whole of my life ahead of me, so I had no choice but to get on with it and make my life. I learned how to drive a car with hand controls. That's the only way I know how to drive. Same with motherhood. It's the only way I knew. I just did it. You know, you work it out. You just work it out. I did things differently to other mothers because all the change tables are they're for able-bodied mothers who are vertical. So I got a desk, you know, just a normal like office desk. And that's how I did my baby change. And honestly, you just work it out.
Somehow, amidst all of this, Louise, when you were a mum with 3 little kids, you also did a course with Lifeline to become a Lifeline counsellor. What did that course teach you about forgiveness?
Oh, gosh, that was such a big thing. My dad had, for years, because this was quite a long time after, maybe 15 years after the accident, every Boxing Day he would get terribly sad. He'd find a hidey hole and go away on his own, and he really dwelled on it. It was a big day for him, whereas for me I didn't even think about it, but for him it was a nightmare. And after I finished the course on forgiveness, I got home and I said to Rob, just can you mind the kids, because I have to write to Dad. I've got to write him a letter. And I said in that letter that I understood now, having my own children, how you would have to feel guilty. You would have to persecute yourself. Because what kind of a human being would you be if you just moved on? I mean, that doesn't work, does it, as a parent? So I understood why he had to feel guilty. But I didn't want to be the object of his guilt, because I had a very rich life, extremely rich life, with so much love and so much personal success. And I'm not talking about outward success. I'm talking about inward success. Just being who I am and what I could do and what I could take on. I had so much confidence, and I didn't need his guilt. So he needed to stop. And I know that he carried that in his wallet for years and years and years. I don't know whether he still carries it in his wallet. If he does, it's probably pressed into the leather by now. So it would be in a bad state. But the sentiment never left. And Dad, from that time on, he did change. He did change. And for him, Boxing Day became just another day, just like it was for the rest of us. So it was a really wonderful, cathartic moment for him and for me also, because I didn't want to be the object of his guilt. Yeah.
Your youngest child carries his name.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You must have been chuffed with that too.
Yeah, of course. Well, as I say, we're a close family, and I love my dad. He's such a generous, curious, intelligent, fun-loving person. He really is. And during those early years after the accident, he lost a lot of that zest. But he's 97 and he still has this terrific sense of humour. He's wonderful, and he's a wonderful man. But the courts put down our accident as the will of God. They could not determine who was responsible for the accident. And I think that he needed to really acknowledge that fully as well. And yeah, I think these are signs. There's a bit like everything where these things, destiny, that I changed seats, the fact that no judgment was brought in the courts against either driver. It was put down as the will of God. It was just, there was no blame. There you have it.
I have loved meeting you and hearing some of your story, Louise. Thank you so much for being our guest on Conversations.
Oh, it's been an honour. Thank you.
Louise Philip was my guest on Conversations today. This conversation was produced by Maggie Morris and recorded on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. Our executive producer is Carmel Rooney. I'm Sarah Kanoski. Thanks so much for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Sarah Kanoski. For more Conversations interviews, head to the website abc.net.au/conversations.